Good morning, guys. And this morning we will continue with our control structures. So far we have already looked at sequential structure, and we said that sequential structure includes input statement, output statements, assignments, calculation statements, and prompting statements. Right, and then we also look at a second control structure known as a selection structure. This structure enables us to make decisions based on a result of a comparison. In some cases, the selection structures are called branching structure because they enables us to branch out in our code. So even in our algorithms, we are able to branch out in different directions based on the option that we select. So the last structure we're going to look at is the loop structure. And the loop structure enables us to repeat a specific line of code a predetermined number of times in some instances, as in the case of a for loop. So let's examine the syntax for a for loop. Starts with for, and as you notice that I have highlighted the key terms or the keywords of the syntax, and some of those keywords are for, to, do, and end for. All right, so we start our loop or for loop with the keyword for, and then note that we end with end for, just like when we deal with the selection structure. We start with if and we end with end if. So after our for statement, we have a variable. So this is the variable that will hold the value, or basically we call it a counter. So every time we have an iteration or we have a loop, the variable is incremented by 1. And then we have a beginning value and the ending value. And then after that we have the do, and then we have the action to be repeated. So the action to be repeated, in that area we'll actually be placing our actual code, the codes that need to be repeated, or the statements or instructions that needs to be repeated. There's also a slightly different version of the for loop where we actually have what we call a step. And what that enables us to do is, for example, we can change the incrementation. So instead of incrementing by a value of 1 every time, we can decide to increment by 2. So we can step 2 times every time. So we can do, instead of incrementing by 1, we can increment by 2, by 10, by 20, or so on. Well, let's quickly look at a problem, some simple problem. It says here to print a table to find the square and the cube of a number 1 to 10. So if we go ahead and look at our problem, we can see the first statement here is a print statement, and that will simply print number, comma, cube. So basically it's just printing number and cube on the screen before it starts the loop. Because in the problem we already know the amount of steps that we need to take to solve the problem, we can use the for loop. It says here from 1 to 10. So in our loop structure, we can go ahead and we start with 4, which is one of the keywords, and we have the number, which is a variable that holds the counter. So that variable will be incrementing every time we loop through that block of code. So the initial number or the initial value is 1. So as we enter the loop, the initial value is 1, and we know that the end value is 10. So after the do keyword, we have the action to be taken. So the first action to be taken is to find the square of the number. So basically what it's going to find the square of 1, seeing that 1, the value of 1 is assigned to number. It's going to find the square of 1. So it's going to say 1 times 1, and the value, it's going to assign it to square, which is a variable. Next, you're going to move on to the second statement, which is a number times a number times a number. So that'll be 1 times 1 times 1, and that would be assigned to cube. Then the third statement within the for loop will print the number, it will print the square, and it will print the cube. So at that point we should have 1 1 1. After it does that, it should go ahead and iterate again next time over that, and do it several times. And every time it iterates, the number value would change, or it will increment from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. So at the end of it, we should have 10 times 10, 10 times 10 times 10, and the value assigned to square, and it should be printed off. And at that point, it would exit the loop when number has reached 10. So if we were to express that problem in the form of a flowchart, we would start with our start, which is called our terminators. So we start and end, those are our terminators. And next we'll have our arrow pointing down to a input box. Remember that box is used for inputs and to prompt for inputs and also to print. But in that instance, we basically going to print number and cube. This is just print to the user. So we're not asking for the user for no inputs. So you might want to, where it says an input, you might want to just overlook that. So it's just prompting the user number and cube, but not actually asking the user to input a number and a cube. It's just printing it on screen. Right? So here we enter a loop. It says, is the number less than or equal to 10? If yes, then it continues, and then or square is equal to the number times number, and the cube is equal to the number times the number times the number. And then it go ahead and do print the next statement, which is to print the value. So it print number, it print square, and print cube. And then what it does within the program is it increments number by 1. So at that point, number is equal to 2, and it does that check again. And if it's not equal to if it's less than or equal to 10, then it runs through that cycle, through that loop, until the value number is equal to 10. Then it exits the loop, and then it ends. So we'll now look at the while constructor, or the while loop. And the while loop executes a set of statements repeatedly as long as the condition is true. So an example would be if you're making some juice, say call it juice, let's say you add the Kool-Aid and you add some sugar. As long as there is sugar in the cup, you want to keep stirring, right? Until the condition until the condition becomes false. So until the sugar has dissolved and there's no more sugar, at that point you stop stirring. So the same as a while constructor. The while constructor, it continues to execute a statement or a command as long as the situation remains or the condition remains true. But as soon as the condition has changed to false, it exits the loop. So it's quite different from a for loop. So a for loop is used when you know exactly the amount of steps or the amount of times that statement should be repeated. Now the while loop, on the other hand, is used when you're not sure how long or how many times that statement should be repeated, right? So we're going to attempt to do a small problem. It says to write an algorithm to enter the age and count the number of students in the class. It says calculate the average age of the group of students if the data is terminated by the value 99. Then it says to print the number of students in the class and the average age of the students. So we have our counter, and if you notice at this point, the counter variable is initialized to 0. So we start at 0 outside of the loop. And within the loop, we use that key term while, because we're doing a while loop. And then we have the age, and we're saying that we have two brackets, a more and a less than sign. So basically it means that if age is not equal to 999, so as long as the age of the person in the classroom or the student is not equal to 999, which is impossible, right? It says to go ahead and do that. So whatever is executed would be between that blocks. And always note that within the conditions statements, we always have an indentation. All right. So within the loop, we have a print statement. It says to we print in here, enter the student's age, and then the students would enter the age, and you'll read that into memory and say total is equal to the total plus age, and the count is equal to count plus 1. So that means that we actually doing the incrementation ourselves. So every time the loop iterates, every time it iterates, 1 is added to the counter. So let's take a look at how we would express that in a flowchart. So as you can see with that solution, with the flowchart, the user will be prompted for age, the total will be assigned, the initial value is assigned 0 for total and for count, and as long as age is not equal to 99, it will go ahead and execute that loop. So total age will be equal now. Total will be equal to the total, which is the current amount, which is 0, plus the age that the user entered. Then count will be incremented by 1. And the user prompted for age again, and that cycle will continue until the statement evaluates to false, and then it will go ahead and calculate the average and display the number of students. And lastly, we have the repeat construct or the repeat loop. And with the repeat loop, instructions are executed at least once. Let's look at the syntax for that loop. So you have the keyword repeat, and then you have the action that needs to be repeat, and then you have the statement to be evaluated and the end for each. So based on where the evaluation statement is, you realize that the action has to be executed at least once before it's evaluated. Let's go ahead and look at a quick example. It says a problem. So problem is to find a solution So we have a program that gets the average of ICT grades of students of Form 4 and print out the average. So before the loop we have a total and we have a counter, both initialized to 0 before we start the actual loop. And within the loop we have a print statement. The print statement says to get the next student grade, and then it assigns the total plus the grade to the total variable. So the current total plus grade to the total variable. Then it increments the counter. First it finds the current counter value and increments it by 1 and assigns it to the counter. And below we have the keyword until, and then we have the condition which is number is equal to 0. So until the number is equal to 0. And once the condition is met, we go ahead and execute the line that says average, and it finds the average by dividing the total by the counter, the value of the counter, and then prints the average. Alright, so in the flowchart, again, we start with the terminator start, and we initialize our variable, total and count. Then we prompt the user for a grade. Then we assign the current total. Then we assign the total plus the grade. So we sum the grade plus total and we assign it to total. Next, we increment counter by 1. At this point, we check if the number is equal to 0, and if not, we go ahead and we repeat that line, that set of codes until the value number is equal to 0, and then we exit the loop, and then we execute the line of code that says average, which will be equal to the total divided by the count, and then we print the average.